So thank you for joining us and welcome to the first of our presentations about how to qualify for the UCI Granfondo World Championships at the Granfondo Vosges on May the 19th. My name is Marvin Faure and I'm the founder and GM of Alpine Cols. We're a group of cycling coaches based in the Alps, and we're of course all passionate about road cycling and especially sportives and Granfondos, which is really our speciality. This is the first of a series of 3 evening sessions intended to help you qualify for the Granfondo World Championships. The first presentation is about guidelines for your personal training plan, and we'll especially focus on the period from now until mid-February, 15 weeks before the event. The remaining 2 presentations are on the 8th of February, when I will present part 2 of the training plan, and finally on May the 2nd, when I'll present how to get your best result on the day itself. I'll answer any questions at the end, but don't hesitate to send questions to me also by email at any time at info@alpinecols.com. Well, before getting into the meat of it, I just want to take a minute to talk about our pre-race coaching camp. This is a 4-day camp designed around the Granfondo Vosges to give you the best chance to qualify. The camp will begin in the evening of Wednesday, May the 15th, and includes a 4-day accommodation package as well as entry to the event. On Thursday and Friday, we'll take you on a reconnaissance of key parts of the route, and Saturday will then be a relatively easy day before the race itself on Sunday. The coach to rider ratio will be 1:6 or better, so you'll have plenty of one-on-one coaching, and there'll be a strong focus on race technique, both on the bike and during the evening sessions. We'll include presentations on topics such as analyzing the event, making a race plan, bike handling, positioning in the peloton, managing energy, nutrition, as well as specific race tactics. So really everything you need to know. Full details on our website, of course, alpinecols.com. Okay, so let's talk about the event. We'll begin by taking a quick look at the profile. The Granfondo is the qualifying event for men aged 19 to 59. All women and men aged 60 and above need to ride the Mediofondo to qualify, which I'll show you in a minute. So the Granfondo distance is 178 kilometers and includes 3,500 meters of climbing over a total of 10 climbs of 5 kilometer or more, and at least 4 or 5 more climbs which are shorter. Some of the gradients approach 10% for 2 or 3 kilometers, although most are in the 6 to 8% range. The roads are often narrow and some of the descents are technical. About 23 kilometers could be described as flat or relatively flat in 3 sections, the first one after just 22 kilometers, second after 70, and the third after 95 kilometers. And then the final 60 are relentlessly up and down. The Mediofondo, which is the qualifying distance for all women and for men aged 60 and above, is 56 kilometers shorter at 122. It includes 2,700 meters of climbing over 5 climbs of 5 kilometers or more and 4 shorter ones. A good part of the route is shared with the Granfondo. So, as already mentioned, the roads are often narrow, the descents technical, and the gradients are mostly in the 6 to 8% range, but sometimes approach 10% for 2 or 3 kilometers. On the Mediofondo, about 20 kilometers is relatively flat in 3 sections, again after kilometer 22, which of course is the same as for the Granfondo, and then 64 and 76. The final 40 kilometers of the Mediofondo are relentlessly up and down. So what does it take to do well on a parcours or on a route like that? You can't develop an effective training plan until you understand the characteristics of the people who do well at this event, or in coaching jargon, what are the event demands? So we'll look at those. First, the physiological demands. As for any endurance event, the most important one is for excellent aerobic endurance. So the plan is to a very large extent based around developing that. Next, durability, which is the ability to repeat successive 20 to 30 minute climbs at threshold without losing power as you go on. As we saw on the Granfondo, there are 10 climbs, which will be 20 to 30 minute climbs, and you'll be going up them at threshold if you're hoping to do well. So this is particularly important at the Granfondo Vosges due to all those climbs. Almost equally important is excellent short-term muscular endurance, which you need for the short, hard, above threshold efforts to place well before climbs, before bottlenecks, and before intersections and that sort of thing. So when you've got to get to the front or near the front of the group or the peloton. Next, of course, with no surprise here, it's important to have a high power to weight ratio because of all the climbing. And finally, the ability to recover quickly between the climbs is equally important and will, of course, help with your durability as well. So a lot of these things are linked between them, but we can split them out this way. Now, here are the psychological demands. First is the ability to maintain your focus, motivation, and lucidity for the time it takes to finish, even when you're severely fatigued. Next is the self-discipline to stick to your maximum sustainable pace on the climbs. And if you have to, you let other people go. Perhaps you'll see them again later, perhaps you won't. If you don't see them again later, they were stronger than you anyway. Third psychological demand is the ability to tolerate long periods of pain and discomfort. It's going to hurt doing all these climbs at threshold, and you've got to be ready for that. And finally, you need to be able to stay positive and deal with any setbacks and negative thoughts throughout the time it's going to take you to finish. Okay, now the technical demands. Obviously, no surprise, it's a mountainous event, so climbing skills are on varied gradients, and energy efficient is extremely important. The other side of that, clearly, what goes up must come down, so you need excellent descending and cornering skills. Then there's quite a bit of flat, so you need very good bunch riding skills. And finally, and by no means the least in terms of technical skills, you need the ability to fuel the ride, which means to eat and drink sufficiently and at the right moments throughout the event. Finally, the tactical demands. They're particularly important to qualify. The competition is very strong. Of course, you've got to finish in the top 25% of your age group to qualify. So the two most important here are the ability to identify which wheels to follow, and therefore which ones to let go. The ones to let go, obviously, being those that you would really struggle to stay with and what you're going to blow up too quickly. And then the second one is the ability to identify when it's important to move to the front of the group in order to avoid splits and crashes and all that sort of thing. So those are the event demands. Now, we come to your personal training plan. The problem for someone like myself trying to produce a training plan for people I don't know is that every single one of these cyclists here is unique. They all may have the same objective of qualifying for the Worlds, but they all have different experiences, skills, and constraints. So a generic plan will inevitably be suboptimum at best, and it could even be damaging, in fact. So we're not providing a generic plan. The plan we propose is, in fact, a framework and a set of guidelines for you to adopt for yourself. So our goal is to give you the means to think carefully about the process and take responsibility for your own preparation. Inevitably, some of what I say will probably not be appropriate for you because I don't know your exact situation. So it's important to take your own responsibility. So let's look at the general principles first. This is the first and most important one. If you want to qualify, you need to make it a priority, not only in your training, but also, at least to some extent, in your life. If this needs negotiation with your partner or family, that would be perfectly normal, but now's the time to do it, okay? Next, you must be consistent. It's no use training really hard for 2 weeks and then doing nothing for the next 2 weeks, or only training on weekends. It's not going to be enough. You should be doing some sort of training on at least 4 and better 5 days per week. Third point, single most important quality you need to develop is your aerobic base. I remember this was number 1 on the event demands. And unfortunately, there are no shortcuts to this. You need to spend a lot of time on your bike, mostly at low intensity. At low intensity, you create all the endurance adaptations you need without adding unnecessary fatigue. And it also helps you build your fat burning capacity, which we'll talk about more in detail. So let's go a little bit into this story of doing a lot of training at low intensity, because it's often misunderstood. So I want to explain this a bit. Why ride at low intensity? Surely, if you want to ride faster, you should train riding faster. No, it sounds logical, right? But it's not so simple. The key point is that you get all the aerobic adaptations you need at low intensity. And making every ride as you can is a very ineffective way to train because of all the extra fatigue, which will then limit how much you can train. It works very well when you first start cycling, but you'll soon hit a plateau. Most cyclists who start, particularly if they start in their midlife, in their 40s or 50s, most of us started by riding as hard as we could every time we went out. It works for maybe a couple of years, but after that you hit a plateau and you can't go any further. So let's look at this chart here. Most beginners, and indeed many club cyclists, train something like the blue bars on this chart, with most of their time spent riding quite hard in zones 3 and 4, so the tempo and the threshold zone. So basically you go out, whenever you hit a climb, you smash it, and when you're riding with your friends, you're always half-wheeling each other, always trying to go faster, and then you're sprinting for the beginning of the village and that type of thing. The thing is, it's been shown that it's more effective to do the majority of your training as shown by the red bars, at high volume and low intensity in zones 1 and 2, combined with a small amount at high intensity. Now, the ratio can be anywhere between 80-20 and 90-10. This is called polarized training, and all professional cyclists adopt a variant of this basic principle, mainly because it's impossible to train 20 to 30 hours a week at medium intensity. You just can't do it. To do polarized training right, you need to be clear on the zones. So here's a very simple 3-zone model, which is all you really need. The most important zone boundary is between the moderate and heavy zones, which are called zone 1 and zone 2 in a 3-zone model. And this boundary is called LT1, the first lactate threshold, and it's the point at which the lactate concentration in your blood begins to increase as you do more work and use more oxygen. And you should do the majority of your training at or below this threshold. So how can you determine it? Well, the best way is with a lab test where they measure the lactate concentration in your blood while you increase the load by steps. This is, however, expensive and not always easy to find. So you can either buy your own lactate test, your own portable lactate tester, or you can estimate the threshold by paying very careful attention to your breathing during a step test on your turbo trainer, starting at a very easy load such as 80 watts and increasing by 15 or 20 watts every 3 minutes. Pay very careful attention to your breathing and note the power and heart rate at the time when your breathing starts to change. This indicates you've just crossed the threshold and you're using more oxygen. This will probably take place at a much lower intensity than you think. For most people, it's no more than 60 to 65% of their FTP or their maximum heart rate, and it may be lower still. It is surprisingly low. Now, back to our list of general principles. The 4th one is to develop your fat burning capacity. This also probably needs some explanation to understand why it's important. So I'm going to go into that for a minute. So why is this important? During endurance exercise, our body has 2 possible sources for energy, basically glucose or fat. There are important differences between the 2 of them. The glucose storage is very limited. You can only store about 2,000 calories of energy in the form of glycogen, whereas you can store at least 50,000 in the form of fat. And for many people, it's a lot more than that. This means that if we draw the analogy with a car, we've got an engine that can burn 2 different types of fuel, but we only have a small tank of one type of fuel, while there's a huge tank of the other. This wouldn't matter if the 2 types of fuel were totally interchangeable, but of course they're not. Essentially, fat is very, very good for base riding for low and moderate intensity, but at a certain point it tapers off, and only glucose or glycogen will fuel your ride at the highest intensities once you're getting close to threshold and certainly above. So there's a huge advantage if you can burn a high percentage of fat at race pace. Why? Because you're conserving glycogen for the hardest efforts only. Okay, someone who burns very little fat at race pace is forced to burn through their reserves of glycogen, and once they're gone, they have to slow down because you cannot consume enough carbs on the bike to replace what you're burning. So as you can see from the chart, which is taken from a research study, even among of well-trained athletes, so even amongst this group, which would include most people attempting to qualify for the Worlds, obviously, the variations are huge, with fat oxidation ranging between 20% to almost 100% at rest. So in other words, when they're sitting on their couch, those people who are burning 100% fat are not using any glucose or any glycogen at all. The researchers found a similar distribution at race pace, but shifted towards less fat burning, of course. The very best could only manage 40%, and many were down to 0. The good news is that it is trainable, and we'll talk about how in a few minutes. Okay, so you may or may not have an idea where you are. The only way to find out is to get a lab test, but wherever you are, you can definitely improve it. We'll come back on that. So back to our list, the 5th principle is to build your short-term muscular endurance. So long as you have good bike handling skills, this is the crucial quality you need to turn a good performance into an excellent one. Why? This is because of the vital importance of positioning and drafting. It's your short-term muscular endurance that enables you to make the hard efforts to get to the front just before a climb or before an intersection, and also to power up the shorter climbs and to follow the right wheels at the right time. You've got to be able to make those efforts. Now, the 6th principle is obviously to do as much climbing as possible. It's a mountainous event. In the last 3 to 4 weeks, we're talking April, May, you should be doing at least 2,600 meters in a single ride if you're preparing the Granfondo, and at least 2,000 meters in a single ride if you're preparing the Mediofondo. In the meantime, do as much as you can. If you live in a flat area, your options are: 1, to do hill repeats on whatever you can find nearby. It's a bit boring, but if that's all you've got, that's all you got. 2, you can travel at the weekend or whenever you can to find some climbs. Or 3, you use a smart trainer linked to an app which will simulate the climbs for you. Okay, not much fun, but it's definitely better than nothing. The 7th principle is to increase the load progressively. If you're currently only training 3 hours a week and you want to increase this to 10 hours a week, you should take at least a month to get there, because your body needs that time to adapt. Next is the crucial importance of recovery. Never lose sight of the fact that your body only gets stronger when you rest and recover. Training breaks you down and creates the stimulus needed, but you only get stronger during recovery. It's really important to allow your body the time it takes for this process. Otherwise, you're just digging a deeper hole and you'll end up overtrained and in a really bad shape. Number 9, you need to monitor your readiness for high load. This is fairly recent science here. It's important because the recent research has shown that training hard only has a positive effect if your body is in a state to benefit from it. So hard training when your body is not in a state is a waste of time and effort. So how do you know whether your body's in a condition to accept that hard training or not? Let's take a look at how we can monitor this. The issue is that recovery and adaptation is inhibited by stress, whether it be training stress or life stress or both. All this stress forces your body to secrete various hormones that are needed to manage the stress, but which also, unfortunately, inhibit your training recovery. So if you're under a lot of stress at home or at work or in life for whatever reason, you won't be able to train hard for periods of time, simply because your those hormones which are being released by your body will inhibit your ability to benefit from the training. So how do you know that? Well, fortunately, there's a very easy way to measure your current level of total stress. You don't need to test for the hormones, but just for their effect on your heart rate, and especially on your heart rate variability, your HRV. So the easy way to do this is to install an app on your phone. The HRV4 training app is free. Install that and then measure your heart rate variability every morning just after waking up. It takes literally 1 minute. After a week, the app will report your normal range. So long as your heart rate variability, your HRV, is normal, all is good. You can train as per your plan. So the normal range, you can see it on that screenshot. It's the gray area, and the white line is the moving average, the 7-day moving average. So if you're on the example here, you can see that on the 20th of May, where the bar is yellow, my heart rate variability was significantly below my normal range. So I simply took a day off. I didn't train on that day, and it rebounded for the following day. Sometimes it takes longer than a day to come back. If you're ill, then it will clearly be depressed for a number of days. But the point is, it's no use doing hard training when your heart rate variability is way below its normal range. If you want to learn more on this, you can check out the video on our YouTube channel, or if you prefer reading, you can find a blog article on on the website, on the Alpine Cols website. So there's the key point there. If it's outside your normal range, train easy or not at all. Oh, back to the general principles again. Finally, last but not least, the 10th of our general principles is that you should include some exercises in your training to develop your technical skills, such as descending, cornering, and group riding. You'll only get better at these through deliberate practice. So think about it and make it happen. All right, so now we've talked about the general principles. Let's take a look at the training plan framework. The framework includes 3 phases or periods. The first one, preparation, where you prepare your body for an increased training load and you develop your aerobic and fat burning capacities. Second one is pre-competition, where you add training stress to sharpen yourself up for the actual event. And finally, the last couple of weeks is the competition or taper phase, where you reduce the fatigue without losing any fitness. Here you can see our framework training plan, which you can download from the Granfondo World website under training plan, or just send me an email to request it. It's a framework and not a detailed day-to-day training plan for the reasons I've already explained. The idea is that if you understand the reasoning and the rationale, you can design your own training plan that's perfectly tailored for you. I'm not going to go through the plan in detail. Let me just highlight the structure. The first page of 2, so we're looking at the first page here, tells you what to focus on during each period and why, the rationale. And then there's a second page with suggested workouts for each period. Each phase is broken down into 4-week cycles, including 3 load weeks and 1 recovery week. And you can see the load design there, the pattern there, how it increases progressively and then comes down in the 4th week, which is a recovery week. Now, just one thing to know: if you are over 50. There's some evidence that adopting a 3-week cycle of 2 load weeks and 1 recovery week might be beneficial, simply because it takes us longer to recover once we're older than 50, approximately. This is the second page with suggestions for workouts during high volume and low volume training weeks during each period. The more experienced you are and the harder you intend to race, the more you need to do in terms of intensity of intervals and high intensity in general, but it should probably never be more than 2 really hard sessions per week. So how do you then take that framework and customize it for yourself? It's best to be pragmatic and start with your constraints, and especially your training time availability. So be realistic. Confirming it with your partner and family might save a lot of misunderstandings and arguments. Which days of the week can you train and for how long? And what are the family or work commitments that will prevent you from training on certain days or weeks during this period? Once you've thought this through, you can block off week by week the training time that you'll have available, and then you can drill down into which days and so on and so forth. You'll probably end up with something that's quite a long way away from ideal, but that can't be helped. That's life. Adjust things as much as you can to respect the principles of increasing the training load progressively, followed by recovery in 3 or 4 week cycles. Now, let's look at what should be in part 1 of your training plan. So this is the part that's going to take us from now until mid-February, the preparation phase. In mid-February, there'll be 14 weeks to go. So now we're going to prepare, we're really focusing on preparation. The key objectives during this period are, 1, to build the ability to train for 10 to 12 hours or more per week, and to ride long distances without undue fatigue. So we're building that training capacity. 2, and really it's part of the first objective, is to build fat burning capacity. So these first 2 are the 80 to 90% of the polarized distribution. The 10 to 20% part is to build strength and neuromuscular capacity, short-term muscular endurance. This will also have the effect of pushing up your critical power or your FTP, and it will also help with durability. Okay, so it's not because it's only 10 or 20% that it's not important. That 10 or 20% is extremely important, and you need to do that very, very hard, and that is why the remainder, the 80-90%, needs to be easier, because otherwise you're going to overtrain. So finally, take every opportunity to include exercises to work on technical skills, descending, cornering, and so on and so forth. So those are the objectives and the focus. Now let's look at how to do it. So how to build training capacity and aerobic endurance. There are really no shortcuts. You need to progress to 4, then 5-hour rides at low intensity. Don't succumb to the temptation to push harder. Remember, these rides are supposed to feel slow. These long, slow rides will also help you burn more fat, but only if you adapt your diet. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second training session of the week should be an interval session. This is part of the 10 to 20%, focused on high intensity. So when it comes to the race, you'll be doing the climbs at or close to your critical power FTP, and you'll be making plenty of shorter efforts above threshold to move up in the group, close gaps, and so on. So these interval sessions are really about 3 things. 1 is pulling up your FTP. The second is about increasing durability. And the third is about increasing your pain tolerance. We'll look at the details on the next slide. The third session during the week is another long, low-intensity ride. And the fourth is a second set of intervals. So let's look now at the intervals we recommend. We could discuss forever on which are the best interval sessions. But apart from the obvious, which is that they should be aligned at least to some extent on an effort that you can expect during the race, the research so far hasn't identified a magic bullet set of intervals. The ones I'm showing you here are, the first one is 2 by 10 minutes with 5 minutes easy. Second one is 4 by 8 minutes with 3 minutes easy. And the third is 8 by 4 minutes with 2 minutes easy. So these will definitely work. But if you tell me you prefer something slightly different, I'm not going to argue. Choose the intensity so that you can complete the session. If you haven't done any intervals for a while, I suggest starting at sweet spot or even tempo, so quite a bit below your FTP. Over a 4 to 6 week period, you can work up to higher intensities as you get the feeling of it. The other question is the cadence. My suggestion is to vary the cadence between sessions, but probably not during a session at this time of year. Assuming you're doing 2 per week, you could do 1 session at high cadence and the other at low cadence. So what does this mean? It depends on you, but high would be above 80 RPM and low would be below 60 RPM. Be aware that in any given power, it will feel harder at high cadence and your heart rate will be higher. A few other things to remember concerning the intervals. 1, warm up very well before the first interval, at least 15 minutes, and really 20 to 30 is better. 2, remember that these are as much about pain tolerance as anything else, so they're supposed to hurt. But 3, however, it is not a good idea, at least during this phase, to completely empty the tank. It's better to stop with one interval left in reserve. Now, if you're going to do 2 interval sessions a week, it's absolutely essential that the long rides are at low intensity. I know I'm repeating that, but it's an important message. Otherwise, your training load will be too high, and you'll sooner or later you're going to end up in a bad place. So remember, the hard training creates the stimulus, but your body only actually rebuilds and gets stronger when you give it the chance to recover. So only do a 5th training ride, even a recovery ride, if you're feeling really good and all indicators are green. But even then, keep it to a maximum of an hour and at very low intensity. Now, let's talk about how you can build your fat burning capacity. The key here is to use your nutrition strategically to support both a high training load and a gradual adaptation to fat burning. This means you need to adjust your total calories consumed to be equivalent to the calories you're burning, while adjusting the relative amount of carbs and fats you eat to correspond to your training load. Basically, you need more carbs when your training load is high, and especially when there's a lot of intensity, and you need much fewer, even no carbs at all, when you're training at low intensity. So the first point is that you should vary how much you eat day by day, depending on how much you're training. Okay, most of us probably eat pretty much the same every day, but that's not the most effective way to train. Put simply, on a rest or recovery day, you should eat a lot less than on a hard training day. But this alone isn't going to have any impact on your ability to burn fat. For that, you need to encourage your body to burn fat preferentially to carbohydrates. And what does that mean? That means keeping your carb intake low, except on the days when you really need it. So ideally, you should be consuming next to no carbohydrates on days when you're not training at all, and very little on recovery days. And you only actually need the carbs on a loading day when you might be doing a set of high-intensity intervals, or on a long ride day when you might be doing a 5-hour ride. So you should calculate your energy expenditure on 3 typical days, and then create 3 standard menus that you can use as a baseline reference for daily adaptation. Okay, so we're going to look at that in more detail now. Here's an example for a fairly typical cyclist, 70-kilogram male, age 50, with the base energy requirements of around 2,000 calories a day. So here now there are 3 nutrition plans at macronutrient level, showing the calorie requirements and then the macronutrient breakdown for 3 different training loads. There are several things to note. 1, the total calorie requirements vary considerably, from 2,600 on a recovery day to 5,100 on a day with a 5-hour ride. And of course, on a race day, it'll be higher still. On a really hard training day, perhaps as you get into April, would be higher still. Next, the macronutrient split also varies considerably, from 17% carbs, 65% fat, and 19% protein, all the way to 43% carbs, 45% fats, and 13% protein. Note that both fat and protein consumption increase in absolute terms, but the big variation in percentage comes from the big increase, the much bigger increase on the carbohydrate side. Note also that protein intake is quite high, even on a recovery day. It works out to 1.8 grams per kilogram for a 70 kilogram. So you should adapt these data for yourself. I don't have time this evening to go into the detail how to do that, other than say you need to start by calculating your basal metabolic rate, which is the energy you expend just to stay alive, and then add the extra expenditure created by your physical activity and your training throughout the day. Alan Couzens, who is the reference here, explains all this in detail in chapter 15 of his book, The Science of Maximal Athletic Development, which is on Substack. So you can, for a small amount of money, you can subscribe to that, and you get it's an outstanding chapter going into great detail about how to do this, how to customize it for yourself. Now let's look at how to turn these macronutritional targets into actual menus, which obviously is what we need at the end of the day. So the best way to create actual menus is to use one of the many online applications. The one I'm using here is called myfitnesspal.com. It's a good one. They have a huge library of different foods, so it's very easy to key in your typical menu, as I've done here for my breakfast. You do the same for the 3 main meals, as well as any snacks you eat throughout the day or on the bike. The app then provides the total calories for the day, as well as the breakdown between carbs, fat, and protein. Okay, you can see that, in fact, on these menus here for the breakfast. But of course, once you've added lunch and dinner and snacks and what you eat on the bike, then you've got it for the whole day. It's very easy to delete or to add new menu items or change the quantities until you reach your target values for the day, and then you're done. So this leaves the final question: what foods are best? In terms of carbs, you should prefer the most natural, high quality and complex varieties, such as fruit and vegetables, lentils, beans, pulses, nuts, and so on and so forth. Avoid sugar in all its refined forms, cakes, biscuits, and industrial foods in general. The only exception to this is on a big day on the bike, where the sheer quantity of carbs you need to consume means you're more or less forced to use sports nutrition, and especially energy drinks. You shouldn't need to use sports nutrition during a 1-hour interval session, or indeed any ride less than 2 or 3 hours. You just need to eat more carbs after the session. But you'll need them on the bike, of course, when you're riding hard for a long time. In terms of fat, once again, we're looking for the highest quality, natural forms, more vegetable than animal. And good sources are as follows: the avocados, hard cheeses, olives and olive oil, nuts and seeds, but also coconuts and coconut oil, oily fish, salmon, sardines, mackerel, all of that stuff, whole fat yogurt, eggs, and last but not least, dark chocolate, which obviously should be consumed in moderation, but nice little bit of chocolate after the meal always goes down well. Last but not least is protein. Here too, it's important to choose based on the quality. So lean meat, poultry, fish, obviously we find fish again. Here is both protein and oily and good quality fats. Cheese, Greek yogurt, also a good source of protein as well, of course, as all the vegetable proteins that you find in lentils, beans, cereals, nuts, tofu, chickpeas, oats, wild rice, and all of that good stuff. Now, the good thing about using an application like MyFitnessPal that I just showed you is that it calculates all of this for you. All right, we're almost finished. But before we do, we still have to mention an unpopular subject. If you want to ride fast and hard, you're going to have to push harder on the pedals, which means stronger muscles. And sadly for us cyclists, the best way to strengthen your muscles is off the bike. Even low cadence, high torque intervals won't help much. To develop leg and core strength, you should plan on 1 or 2 sessions per week, ideally guided by a strength and conditioning coach with experience in cycling. The goal at this time of year is to increase the strength of your leg and core muscles. If you're new to this, err on the side of caution to limit the risk of injury. You can find plenty of stuff on YouTube, but be careful because it's very easy to do the movement a little bit wrong, and then you're going to injure yourself. Okay, so be careful. It's best to get a coach who can help you. The other side, which is really important, is mobility and flexibility. 2 or 3 20-minute sessions per week. Pilates or yoga can be extremely beneficial. I use both. Learning correct technique is vital, so choose a practitioner who knows cycling and only takes small groups, or better still, individuals. Again, if you do it wrong, you're risking injury, and I'm speaking from experience. You should complement all of this occasionally with other activities, other sports, running, swimming, even just walking. The thing is, if cycling is your only sport, you risk building up imbalances and soft tissue problems over time. So it really is a good idea to complement it with other activities. So that's it. I've given you the principles and guidelines that should allow you to prepare yourself well between now and mid-February. So rendezvous on February the 8th to see how things have gone and talk about part 2. which is the pre-competition period. In the meantime, it's up to you. Take the principles, create your own training plan, and then follow it. If you'd like professional help to be at your absolute best on D-Day, we can help you in two different ways. Join one of our coaching camps for a big block of training, as well as one-on-one coaching on your technical skills. Of course, we ride with you and we observe you very closely. We use video and so on. And of course, we give you plenty of advice and tips for your preparation and the event itself. Or you can sign up for a 6-month coaching agreement to receive individual day-to-day coaching and one-on-one advice, which really helps, of course. Thank you very much for listening. You can always send me questions at info@alpinecols.com. I'm now open to any questions you may have, and over to you.